Hello, you're welcome to another exciting edition of this Bible study program. My name is Usamagbi Leslie Gaiva, and I'm a gospel preacher in the Church of Christ. You're welcome to this section or this program. Today, we're going to be talking about election. Brother Handy from Kentucky will be taking us through that subject. We want to see whether or not Christian can or should vote during election. Brother Handy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been.
Yeah, so a friend of mine, Teresa, actually sent me a question, I think 2 days ago, on whether Christians can or should vote during election. I actually posted something on my WhatsApp status that actually generated the question. And Nigerian general election is in a few days, this coming Saturday. So people I expected to be involved in, this activity in order to, change of government and all of that. So we have a few questions based on my conversation with her, and I would be throwing those questions to you, and we would like you to help us answer them. So the first question is, what does the Bible say about Christians involving in an election by voting? We are not going to look at people participating in by contesting now, but particularly we want to look at voting in an election. And in answering that question, I would like us to have in mind Romans 13. Some have thought that that's a passage that actually mandates Christians to, vote. Some others hold the extreme view that, well, Christians are not even expected to vote at all. If you look at Romans 13, it says, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God." If you read further, you see some other points that were made. So the question is, what has God's word, the Bible, say about Christians voting?
Well, as far as that idea of voting or participating in that way in an election, the Bible doesn't say anything about voting at all. Now, you mentioned Romans chapter 13. Romans 13 talks about civil government and shows us that God has ordained civil authorities. He's given them a purpose for what they are to do, and he's given us instructions to submit to civil authorities. So voting, though, isn't talked about in that passage, and it's not talked about anywhere else in the Bible. So whether we vote or not, the actual practice of voting, that would have to fall under the matter of opinion or personal liberty, that we're each going to make decisions based on our conscience whether we're going to participate in that or not. Now, on that question on Romans chapter 13, though, because it does talk about civil authorities and how we are to be subject to those who are in positions of civil authority, the idea of saying, well, that means we are to vote, that's making a bit of a jump that's really not there. Unless we are living in a country, and I did some research getting ready for our interview today to see if there were countries around the world that had mandatory voting, because in the United States, and from what I understand in Nigeria, that voting is voluntary. You can choose to vote or you can not vote, and it's not something that is required. There are a handful of countries where it is mandatory, where you could theoretically be fined if you don't vote. So that would be another matter. If the civil authorities tell you this is mandatory, then that would fall under that discussion of submitting to authorities. But when it's not been made mandatory, we can still recognize that God ordained civil authorities for a purpose, that they are in place to do a certain work, and we can submit to civil authorities, but that doesn't mean we necessarily have to participate in the voting process. So Romans chapter 13, if we live in a country that doesn't require voting, Romans 13 does not tell us we have to vote. There's no passage in the Bible that would tell us that Christians must do this. It's going to be a matter of conscience and a matter of personal opinion whether or not we're going to participate in that way or not.
Okay, thank you very much. So your answer to that question basically is that the act of voting by Christians is optional, it's a matter of opinion. The Bible doesn't say you have to do that or you must not do that. All right, that would lead me to the second question. And one of the questions my friend Tessie asked me was that she's aware of some denominations that actually condemn voting. And she said that I'm also aware of some of those denominations that these denominations discourage their members from voting on a religious basis. Now, this is not an optional thing. I mean, they believe that the Bible condemns voting. If you are aware of any of those denominations. What is your view on that? Are they going too far? Don't they have scriptures to back up what they believe? What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know of what passage they would be going to. I mean, we talked about Romans 13 a little bit already, as far as the fact that we are to submit to civil authorities. But again, when voting is a matter of, as far as legally, what the authorities have put in place, they permit you to vote, but they don't require you to vote. So Romans 13 doesn't say that this is something that you have to do. But then on the other hand, you have this idea that you're talking about here with those who would condemn this as something that Christians cannot do. And you have, again, Romans 13 says that there is a legitimate function for civil authority. So on one hand, that we're to submit to them and we're to recognize their authority. And so understanding that they can have these elections in place. Now, for those who would say that, well, Christians can't do that, can't participate in that, I don't know what passage they would go to make that argument, to really to say that that's something that is something that we could condemn, or we could say that this is wrong. We might say, based on our opinion, I don't think it does much good, or I don't think it's a good idea, but that's a different thing from saying that this is something that is a sin or something that is wrong, or the Bible teaches against this. That's something completely different. That would fall into the category more like what Jesus described in Matthew chapter 15, where he condemned the Pharisees because they were condemning Jesus's disciples in Matthew 15 and verse 2, because they were violating the tradition of the elders by not washing their hands before they ate. And so they were having this rule that you cannot eat without washing your hands. They may have had good reasons for that. And again, mentioned that was a tradition. But Jesus said, when you make that a religious requirement in Matthew 15 and verse 9, you are rendering your worship to God in vain, because you're teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. So it's a different topic, but it's the same principle, that when someone says you cannot vote because it's against what the Bible teaches, or the Bible condemns this practice, the Bible doesn't say anything about it. So when we say that, well, this is something that is a sin if you participate in that, or something that's wrong if you participate in that, then that's going too far. That's going in what Jesus condemned in Matthew 15. So someone may choose not to vote. That's whether someone chooses to or not to, that's a matter of opinion. That's a matter of liberty. But it is not okay for us to condemn other people because they, for whatever reason, choose to participate in the act of voting, because there's no prohibition to that in the New Testament.
Okay, there's no prohibition to that in the New Testament. Okay, that sums up uh, the answer to that question. All right, now let's move a little bit. Thank you so much for that. Let's move a little bit to um, some individuals who are apolitical. They don't have no interest in politics, and they don't. I was actually, before this interview, after my friend asked the question, so I was asking a few persons their opinion on why they should vote and why they should not vote, and some persons actually gave me some reasons why they think they shouldn't vote, and why some other persons, oh, the government is bad, we have to vote so we can get out this government. Some persons were like, oh, in fact, my friend Baba Femi actually sent me a text, and he said, in Nigeria, it is not free and fair election, it is rigged and fair. So that is his own opinion. So for him, he believes that no matter what, when you cast your vote, it doesn't count. So of what use it is and all of that. So he also made a distinction between, it was in his words, he said, there's what we call the people's choice, and then the candidate, the choosing one. So the people's choice, according to him, is the individual that people want elected, but the choosing one is the person that the inner caucus actually wants to be there and all of that. So they're going to do everything possible to get him there. So a lot of people have different views on why they should vote and why they should not vote. So I'm going to be asking those who are indifferent, who are nonchalant about voting, do you think they are doing anything wrong? Are they committing sins as far as, God's word is concerned?
Well, as far as whether they're committing sin, for someone who chooses to stay out of the political process completely and not vote, I would never condemn someone for making that decision. That if someone decides that they don't want to vote, and what you described there with people being disenfranchised and thinking that their vote doesn't matter, that the elections are rigged. We have that sort of thing here in this country too, where people bring up those same types of questions, that they don't think the elections are fair. They don't think the people who are being voted for are actually getting into office. And so whether that's true or not, the perception is there that people see that, well, it doesn't really matter. So, my vote doesn't matter. And so, why should I bother in doing that? So that brings up an idea that I thought about on this,
Okay.
that people have some religious ideas as far as, well, they'll make an argument from the Bible about why you shouldn't vote, and we can't say that the Bible condemns voting. But there are people, because of what they perceive in the process, that they don't think it does any good, that they don't see any real change coming, or doesn't really matter who you vote for, because the whoever is the worst possible person always seems to get in. At least sometimes we feel that way, that it could get to the point where you just feel like or you come to the conclusion, some people may come to the conclusion that it's just not worth the time and the effort to do this. It's just not enough of a priority, that we have other things to focus on. For Christians, we can say we're focused on spiritual things and preaching the gospel, and even not spiritual or religious things. We need to focus on our work. We need to focus on providing for our families, other responsibilities and things like that. And it takes a certain amount of time to educate yourself about the candidates and policies and things that you're voting for. It takes time to go to the polls and cast your vote and things like that. And so someone may get to the point that, because they don't see it as being, their vote counting for very much, they may get to the point where it's just not worth it. Whether that's a wise decision or not, I'll leave that to each person to decide. But it's very easy for someone to get to that point. Now, probably the most common thing, or one of the most common things that I hear about why people choose not to vote, is because they view this as sort of picking between the lesser of two evils. That you have say two major candidates that have to choose from to vote for some particular office, and neither one of them is someone that you feel like you can support, or that you can vote for any number of reasons. And so you think that, well, why would I vote for the lesser of two evils? Because a lot of times the argument's made, if you vote for the lesser of two evils, you're still voting for evil.
Right.
And sometimes that's said in just not really in the sense of evil, but just we're just not satisfied with the choices that we have on the ballot. And so sometimes that might be made lightheartedly, but sometimes it's serious, that we don't see that there are legitimate or good choices for for those who are running for office, or different policies that are made. So that's, that is a serious consideration. Obviously, when we vote for candidates, if we choose to participate in that, we're voting for someone who's going to hold an office in civil authority. We're not voting for elders in the local church. We don't vote for elders anyway, but it's a different role. It's a different process. So there's, as far as the qualifications, we're not looking at 1 Timothy 3 to see what the qualifications are for elders and then trying to apply that to who we're voting for leaders. They're not the same thing. But you do have a lot of times, because you can have two candidates or more candidates who are running against one another, and we see that all of them are corrupt and all of them are crooked, and we don't trust any of them. How can we vote for one of them thinking, well, this one maybe is less corrupt than some of the other ones? And sometimes we feel like we're in that position, but you have these ideas that, well, maybe my vote doesn't really count for very much, so it's just not worth it. And then this idea of, I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. So it's not necessarily people coming at this and saying that, well, the Bible condemns voting. They're not saying that, but they are questioning whether they personally should bother being involved with it, because they don't see very much value in it. Now, I think there can be an argument made to vote. I think we're going to talk about that, but I definitely see the argument for those who choose to just abstain from it and just not get involved in it, because it is kind of discouraging to see what's going on, and it's very easy to see that, or to come to the conclusion that, well, what I'm doing when I go to vote is not really having much of an impact. So I certainly sympathize with that idea, and can see why people would come to that conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, those are some very legitimate reasons why some persons have actually chosen to abstain. My friend Pat posted something sometime on his page, and that corresponds with what you just said. He said choosing the lesser of two evils is still choosing evil, which the Christian should never do. So he had a lot of backlash on that statement, because people, sometimes those on the other side who think that, well, someone was telling me the other day concerning this very issue. I made a statement that, some persons think that every politician is the same. So those guys are all the same, regardless of the party you are coming out from. So she said, yeah, actually, they're all the same. I agree with those people who said that. But, we just have to look at the one that is okay a little bit, and then see what we can do and all of that. So, I mean, those are some legitimate reasons. However, let's direct our attentions now to, I mean, people who are expected to vote. In Nigeria, the situation is very critical, because the current government is being criticized almost by everybody. And so it seems that people are tired, and a lot of attention is shifting to someone else, and so that is why everybody, even religious leaders and all of that, are publicly encouraging their members to go out and vote. And some are even particular about who they should vote for. I'm not going to do that, of course. But I want you to tell us, before we go to the final question on what are the principles that should guide our voting, give us some maybe legitimate reasons why people who choose to vote should do that.
Well, it's interesting that you said the election there, and obviously I'm not familiar with the politics and the things that are going on in your country. I'd have a hard enough time keeping up with what's going on in the United States here, but as far as all of that that's going on, I've noticed, and I've heard other people make this comment, that at least in this country, this election, whatever one's coming up, is the most important election of our lifetime. And then that election passes, and then the next one comes along, and they'll say the same thing, that this is the most important election. And so here in this country, we kind of get tired of hearing that. In your situation, it may be what you're saying, that this is a critical election, and so I won't argue with you on that. You know better about that than I do. I just know in this country here, people, kind of get tired of hearing that because, well, it's every election seems anymore is the most important one. But
Yeah.
on this point of legitimate reasons for voting, because we've talked about why people might abstain from it and decide not to do it.
Mm,
And this is because of what we said with what the Bible teaches, that this is not something that the Bible would require anyone to do. And
mm,
it's not something the Bible condemns anyone for doing. So this is a matter of choice. So for those who would make the choice to vote, are there legitimate reasons for doing this? I think the primary reason why we could say that it can be good for a Christian to vote is because it's another way that Christians can help influence the world around them for good. Now, that is assuming that there is anything that we can call good on the ballot. There may not be. And so in that case, then we can just kind of throw that out the window. But if there is any way that we can cast a vote for something that is good, then that would be something that, or a way for us to influence the world around us. We can help elect people who would do good for the city or state or the nation that we live in. We can help vote for policies that would help do good and provide a helpful environment for us to do the work that we're called to do as Christians, and we can help influence it that way. So it's a way to have our voices heard without being actively involved in the government, because obviously not everyone can do that. Not everyone can hold public office, but also you have just the reality that not everyone wants to do that or has any desire to do that. But this is a way potentially for us to make our voices heard and in some way influence the direction of the nation, of the state, of the city, wherever it is that we may live, to things that are in principle more good than the direction that the world is often going.
mm. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for that. So, I mean, if you are voting, those are some of the legitimate reasons why people should vote. It's important we ask that so that people will get the point. And yeah, the reason I understand the fact that people always say this is the most important election. The reason why I said that is, in Nigeria, it's always between two political parties. I mean, either this party or this party, either of them must be, elected. While we have several other political parties, but they are more like minority, regardless of who is there. These two people would either win the election. However, this very one is different in the sense that you know, there is another party which has been existing, but suddenly it becomes exceptionally popular and, majority wherever you go. In fact, what I posted on my page that led to my friend asking this question was a group of Christians. I don't know the church they belong to. I don't know, but a group of people looking at the way they were gathered and dressed, they are Christians. They actually recomposed a music, a hymn or a chorus in that we normally sing in the church. They recomposed that song to actually reflect that particular politician, something like that. And it was really very funny. So that's the kind of importance that is attached to this very election that has not been there before. Before I go to the next or last question I have on my list, there was a book in one of your videos that I watched or concerning voting. You did that 2 years ago. I think you said the book was written by, was it David Lipscomb? I can't exactly remember now. If you
Yeah,
don't
David
mind,
Lipscomb.
if
Yeah, his book on civil government.
okay, do you want to recommend that? I know you did recommend that book in your video. If you have that book in your in Gospel Armory, you can tell people how they can get the book
Yeah. I don't
if
know if I don't have a copy handy that I can grab, but yeah, the book, and it's available at the publishing company that I have, Gospel Armory, that we've published this book because I wanted to try to help get it out there. I wouldn't necessarily say that I agree with David Lipscomb on everything, but he is I would definitely recommend everyone who's able to. And if you can't purchase the book, you can find the PDF of it online if you do a search for it, but that you can read for free. But I would encourage Christians to, if you haven't looked at what he writes, to check it out, because it will, for a lot of people, especially those who have grown up just accustomed to voting and being involved in the political process and doing all that, it will challenge your thinking on that. And for a lot of Christians, challenge the way that they view civil authority, and from a biblical perspective. And I think what Lipscomb said on the origins of government and the nature of government, I think he's right on that. Some of the applications he makes, I don't fully am in agreement with him on that, but I would recommend for Christians who haven't read what he's written on that to check it out, because even if you don't come away agreeing with him, it will be good for you to kind of look at his arguments and see what he has to say, and examine those according to the scriptures. Don't take what he says because it's in a book somewhere, but examine them according to the scriptures, just as we would encourage anyone to do with what you or I are saying on this video or anytime else we preach or teach, that we want people to look to the scriptures and examine them. So yeah, that book by David Lipscomb, Civil Government, I would definitely recommend anyone to check that out and see what he's written on that.
All right, all right. Thank you for that. I noticed that you were very particular about the book, and it just occurred to me now to ask you. I didn't plan to ask you, but I mean, I just said to ask to see if you still would like to recommend that. So anybody can actually get it, from Gospel Armory, or like you said, you can search for it. But if you like the hard copy material, you can get it from Gospel Armory. They have to visit your website, right?
Yeah, it's you can order it through the website, or if someone wants to contact me directly,
Okay.
and I can help them get a hold of it that way too.
All right. All right. So thank you very much. Let me go to the last question on my list. Those who are voting in elections, on Saturday, a lot of people will be going out to vote for whoever it is they are voting for. What are the various principles that should guide their voting? What is it that they should look out for in voting, and whoever they want to vote for? What are the qualities they should? What are the things that should influence their decisions?
Well, as far as voting and why people make the decision, when they go to vote, who they're going to vote for, why they're voting for the particular candidates they're voting for, people may come up with all sorts of different reasons. And a lot of them, at least what I've observed in this country, and it could be this could be a universal problem, that seems like a lot of people vote based on selfish interests, that, well, what do I want? Who's going to be the candidate, or what policy is going to provide me with something, or make my life better, or whatever it might be. And so they vote based upon what they want to happen. Christians, if we're going to vote because we have given our life over to Christ, that he is Lord over us, and we recognize that, if we vote, we need to be voting not what I want, but what would be according to his will. And when we ask what would be according to his will, well, he's told us in the New Testament what he expects civil authorities to do. We talked about, or mentioned earlier, Romans chapter 13, where it says that God has ordained civil authorities, that he's established them and given them a purpose. And in Romans 13 and verse 3, it says, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil." So Paul there in those verses outlined in basic terms what God expects civil authorities to do, why he ordained them to fill that role in the first place. And it is to punish evildoers and by extension, to protect those who are innocent. That's why civil authorities are there. So when we decide who we're going to vote for or what policies we're going to vote for, is it in line with what Paul wrote there? Are they going to punish those who do wrong? Are they going to protect those who are innocent? And then another passage along those same lines is in 1 Timothy chapter 2, where Paul gave Timothy instructions that he was to pass on about prayers that were going to be offered for all men. And in particular, he mentions praying for those who are leaders, those who are civil authorities. In 1 Timothy 2 and verse 2, he says, you pray for kings and for all who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. So pray for these leaders, that they would allow us to lead a quiet and peaceful life, or a quiet and tranquil life, that in essence, they would leave us alone and allow us to have the freedom to serve God and to do his will without government interference or hindrance or persecution or anything like that. But it's important to, when we think about, Paul says, pray for this. And so if we're going to vote, we need to do this with this in mind, because the principle, you pray for what is good and what is desirable. Well, that's what you would vote for if you're going to vote. There's a reason why Paul said this. And it wasn't just because, well, we prefer to just be left alone, or we prefer to have the type of freedom that he talked about here, where we're not being oppressed and we're not being persecuted. And the reason why we pray for this is what he said in the next two verses in 1 Timothy 2, 3, and 4. This is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Why do we pray for our leaders to not persecute us or try to stop the gospel being spread? Because God wants all people to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. He wants us to be able to be free to spread the gospel. Yes, the gospel can spread and has spread under persecution, but Paul says here, our prayer needs to be, let those hindrances be, as much as possible, let them be removed, so that we can carry out the work that God has given us to do. So when we think about voting, we could vote for candidates who will leave Christians alone and provide an environment where we are free to teach the gospel and free to worship without hindrance from either the authorities or other groups who might try to target us because they are being hindered by the government, those groups that would try to persecute the church. Well, the government's stopping them, and the government's not standing in the way of Christians worshiping and teaching. That's what we want. That's what we're praying for, according to 1 Timothy chapter 2. So if we're going to vote, that's the type of thing we are to vote for. So anything else that we would decide, well, we want to vote for this candidate or this candidate, whether it's how they want the trade among of our nation to trade with other nations, or what programs they have for education or whatever it might be. And all of our opinions on those things, those are to be secondary. The primary thing that we are to look for is what leaders and what policies are going to best reflect the will that God has for civil authorities and what he wants them to do, to punish evildoers, protect the innocent, and to provide an environment where we are free to do the will of God without hindrance or without persecution.
Thank you so much for that. Basically, when you are going out to vote, or if, I know you particularly use the word if, because some persons would not actually vote no matter what you say to them, and there are some circumstances that also prevent some persons from voting. Like in Nigeria, some persons registered in a particular place and they have traveled out of that location, they cannot vote. Some persons say they cannot face the stress because some believe it's stressful staying on the line for several hours, and sometimes it could become dangerous, and people can begin to fight and it becomes violent and a lot of things like that. However, if you are voting and you are going to vote, you have to sit down to consider which of these candidates would actually implement good principles that will not be against Christians and all of that. I don't want to repeat what you said. Thank you very much. That's our brother Handy Soko, a gospel preacher in Kentucky. His website is www.plainbibleteaching.com. So when you go there, you can see a lot of materials and all of that in on the website. And as well, he also publishes, his publishing company is Gospel Harmony. Thank you so much, Brother Handy. I really appreciate it. Do you have any closing speech for us before we leave?
Not much. Just want to reiterate that voting, if someone were going to vote as a Christian, it's a matter of conscience. It's not something that is required. It's not something that must be done. So if we vote, we just make sure that we are doing so as a Christian first, that has to be the primary thing in every area of our life, including whatever we choose to do as far as voting. We have to do it as a Christian first.
All right, you have to be Christians first in everything. So that is very important. That's the first thing we need to think about in all our actions. You have to act first as a Christian before any other thing. Thank you so much for that, and I appreciate Tessy. She's in Nigeria, for asking the question, Benin City precisely. I appreciate you for the question, and I hope that this discussion would shed some light on whatever trouble anyone is having, and would encourage you, regardless of where you belong, to do the right thing. Thank you so much, Brother Handy. Appreciate you.
Well, thank you.